It's the beginning of November, a time when across Scotland and the wider UK, people light bonfires, set off fireworks and argue about whether we should do any of that at all on Facebook.
But why? In the early hours of the 5th of November 1605, following a tip-off, a search party entered the cellars beneath the Palace of Westminster. There they found one Guy Fawkes and 36 barrels of gunpowder. Fawkes was in there waiting for the state opening of Parliament later that day, knowing the king would be in attendance and that he could blow him sky high.
But how did we get here? What does that have to do with Scottish history? And why am I missing my beard?
Welcome to Scotland Unplugged, and the story of a dynasty, some religious persecution, and the ultimate foiled plot. James VI of Scotland was born up there behind me in Edinburgh Castle on the 19th of June 1566. But how did he become King of England, and why did Guy Fawkes try to blow him up?
The fact that James was born in the castle probably gives us a bit of a clue.
He lived in turbulent times. The castle is and was a fortification. It wasn't really used as a royal residence. By the 1500s, royals much preferred to hang out in palaces, Linlithgow, Falkland and Holyrood, not on top of a volcanic rock next to a festering loch. But sometimes that was a necessary evil.
On the 9th of March 1566, Mary, Queen of Scots, was pregnant with James. Mary Stuart was Catholic, in a country in the grips of a Protestant Reformation.
Across Europe, religious persecution was rife. Protestants persecuted Catholics, Catholics persecuted Protestants. It kind of depended on where you were at the time, what your place was in the pecking order. Mary tolerated the new Protestant religion in her country and even funded the church, but that wasn't quite enough to keep her in the good books. On the night in question, she was having dinner here in Holyrood at the other end of the Royal Mile when James's father, Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, marched into the room with a group of Protestant nobles. Together they stabbed her private secretary and favourite, David Rizzio, 57 times right in front of her. At that point, the Queen quite sensibly retreated up there to give birth.
Less than a year later, Darnley was found dead, after having been blown up and suffocated.
Such a nice guy, they murdered him twice. Then Mary married Lord Bothwell, possibly against her will, and then the newlyweds lost the Battle of Carberry Hill. Bothwell ran away and Mary was imprisoned on Loch Leven Island.
While she was there, it's thought that she miscarried twins, and she was forced to abdicate in favour of her 13-month-old son.
Then she escaped from Loch Leven, lost the Battle of Langside, and escaped again. This time across the Solway Firth to England in what she believed was her rightful future as Queen.
Mary and James would never see each other again.
At the time, Mary's cousin Elizabeth I was on the throne in England, but it was controversial. Elizabeth was the daughter of Henry VIII, a man who loved the taste of wedding cake. He'd been married 6 times and had to put his own country through a Protestant Reformation just so he could get divorced. His elder daughter, Mary, was Catholic and would become known as Bloody Mary on account of the number of Protestants she had killed. But then she died and Elizabeth took over, and the tables turned again.
To deal with the growing fracture in her country, Elizabeth introduced a religious settlement.
Anyone in public or church office had to swear allegiance to the Queen as head of the church and state. Any Catholic recusants who refused to attend Anglican services faced fines or even torture and execution. Elizabeth was the daughter of Anne Boleyn. Anne hadn't been lucky enough to get the divorce option. Instead of losing a husband, she lost her head.
Catholics didn't do divorce. Anne Boleyn was Henry's second wife. Many didn't recognise Elizabeth as a legitimate heir.
That meant some of them saw the Queen of Scots as the rightful Queen of England and Ireland too. So when Mary turned up south of the border, far from being welcomed with open arms by her cousin, she was imprisoned. In relative luxury. Starting with Carlisle, she was bounced from castle to castle for nearly 19 years.
But she wasn't a quitter.
There were plots. Letters sent in ciphers between Mary and Catholic supporters, some of them in sympathetic countries. Those letters were intercepted by Sir Francis Walsingham, Elizabeth's spy master. And eventually, in the wake of the Babington Plot, a plan to assassinate Elizabeth, when it was obvious that Mary wanted the English throne at all costs, Elizabeth signed a death warrant.
Before she could change her mind, they whisked it off to Fotheringay Castle, where Mary was swiftly beheaded.
That's a lot of information in a short space of time, but in a nutshell, that's the background James VI grew up in.
His mother was gone, but he had a regent, Mary's half-brother, James Stuart, Earl of Murray.
The Earl was the son of James V, and older than Mary, but he wasn't a legitimate heir. You can imagine how that might have stung a bit. In the end, he was instrumental in getting rid of his sister, so he could rule on behalf of his nephew. He looks really happy about it too. Later, in 1570, he's widely reputed to have become the first head of a government to be assassinated by firearm. The king's next regent was his paternal grandfather, Matthew Stuart, the Earl of Lennox. He was attacked and fatally wounded by Mary's supporters outside Stirling Castle. Regent number 3 was the Earl of Mar. He died of a vehement sickness following a banquet.
James was starting to look like a bit of a jinx.
None of this did much to make a young king less paranoid, and you can see the evidence in his writing. In 1590, when his future wife Anne of Denmark sailed to meet him, her ship was hit by a storm and had to turn back. James sailed to meet her and married her in Norway. When they reached Denmark, there was talk of witchcraft. On the way home, his own fleet was hit by a storm in the Forth. You can kind of guess what happened next.
The resulting North Berwick witch trials would lead to witch hunts across Scotland and England and across the pond in Salem.
James even wrote a book about his new passion, the catchily titled Demonology in Form of a Dialogue, divided into 3 books written by the high and mighty Prince James, by the grace of God, King of England, Scotland, France and Ireland, Defender of the Faith. I don't think that would fly now. He wrote other things too. The True Law of Free Monarchies and Basilian Doron detail his theories on monarchy. All monarchs probably believe in the divine right of kings, but James put it down on paper in detail.
Elizabeth I died in 1603. She had never married or had any children. She had no legitimate siblings left, and that meant her cousin, James VI of Scotland, was the logical heir.
He came with some baggage, and he might have been a paranoid mess, but he was pragmatic, and he wanted peace. Unless he thought you were a witch, obviously. Catholics in England breathed a sigh of relief. After all, his mother had been a devout Catholic. When she'd been executed, Mary had stripped off her outer garments to reveal a red dress, the traditional colour of martyrdom.
Maybe her son could be convinced to see things from their point of view.
James was crowned King of England and Ireland on the 25th of July at Westminster Abbey, and things started off reasonably well. The new king brought in an air of tolerance. He said he would not persecute any that will be quiet and give an outward obedience to the law. In his first year though, he survived 2 plots. There was the main plot, where a group, supposedly led by Lord Cobham and Sir Walter Raleigh, planned to replace him and his family with his cousin, Arabella Stuart. And there was the the secondary plot, where some priests planned to kidnap him, hold him in the Tower of London and force him to be more tolerant of Catholicism. Both those plots, whatever they were foiled. But you know what they say about bad things happening in threes. Things got even more heated when on the 19th of February 1604, James got word from one of his spies that his wife, Anne, had received a rosary from the Pope, and he hit the roof.
He denounced the Catholic Church. He reinstated fines and banished all Catholic clergy. Things were getting worse for England's Catholics.
It's probably worth mentioning that the king came with an extra helping of suspicion and unpopularity because he was Scottish. He was obsessed with making Scotland and England one country, telling Parliament that God himself had put them on one island. That went down like a lead balloon north and south of the border. Otherwise I might be talking to you from North Britain.
Step forward this guy.
Guy Fawkes wasn't the main instigator of the Gunpowder Plot, but he's definitely the most famous. He'd been born into a Protestant family in York, but following the death of his father when he was 8, His mother remarried. His new stepfather was a recusant Catholic, and that rubbed off on a young Guy. So much so, he converted to Catholicism himself, and then in 1591 he sold his father's estate and went off to join Catholic Spanish forces fighting Dutch Protestant forces in the 80 Years' War.
He was good at it too.
As well as being a physically imposing presence, he was a gifted speaker. In 1603 he travelled to Spain to try to gather support for a Catholic uprising. He described James as a heretic and said it will not be possible to reconcile these two nations as they are for very long. His request was politely declined by the court of Philip III.
In 1604 he returned to England and got involved with a group of Catholics led by Robert Catesby.
And then things really took off. Over the next year a plan formed. They would assassinate the king and replace him with his daughter, Princess Elizabeth, the third in line to the throne. Then they would return England to Catholicism. What could possibly go wrong? One of the conspirators, Robert Winter, would later say that they tried to tunnel under Parliament, but no tunnel's ever been found. Eventually they heard that an undercroft had become available for rent beneath the House of Lords, and having taken over the lease, they began moving in their gunpowder. But the opening of Parliament was delayed, and while they waited, their fireworks started to degrade. So they moved in more. Fawkes was the soldier, and well experienced with explosives, so he was the man charged with setting the fuse.
In the early hours of the 5th of November 1605, he watched and waited.
Soon the king would arrive to open Parliament, he'd set his fuse and escape across the Thames. But conscience had gotten the better of some of his co-conspirators, and they decided to warn some of the Catholic lords not to attend Parliament. They wrote to William Parker, Lord Monteagle, telling him, "Think not slightly of this advertisement, but retire yourself into your country, where you may expect the event in safety. For though there be no appearance of any stir, yet I say they shall receive a terrible blow this Parliament, and yet they shall not see who hurts them."
Initially there was no reaction, and the conspirators thought the letter had been taken as a hoax. But his lordship started to worry and sent word to the king.
The search party was dispatched to Parliament, where Fawkes was discovered.
He was taken before the king. According to one account, when he was asked what he was doing in the cellars, he said he wished to blow you Scotch beggars back to your native mountains.
James couldn't help but be impressed with what he called Fawkes' Roman resolution, just not impressed enough to stop ordering his torture. Fawkes was taken to the Tower of London and tortured, and he held up pretty well, but over the next 4 days he slowly began to reveal the details, the identities of the other conspirators and their plans. On the 27th of January 1606, Fawkes and some of his co-conspirators were taken to Westminster Hall, where they were put on display and tried. Fawkes, despite all his confessions, pled not guilty.
On the 30th and 31st of January, the conspirators were dragged through the streets behind horses, taken to the gallows and hanged, drawn and quartered.
Guy Fawkes himself died on the 31st. He was lucky in that the hanging killed him before the rest of the ordeal. And these days, people put an effigy of him on top of a bonfire, which seems kinda dark. The guy is traditionally made from old clothes, straw, newspaper, whatever might burn. In the 19th century, because of all the old clothes, the word guy came to mean a strangely dressed man, and more recently, just a man. Over the years, the effigies have sometimes represented more contemporary figures, which is even darker. People have come to view Guy Fawkes in different ways over the past 420 years, and it all depends on your point of view. Some see him as a terrorist, some a freedom fighter or a martyr. A lot of people don't know anything about him, even if they unconsciously use his name every day. In my family though, and probably in most, bonfire night has nothing to do with politics or religion or anything really serious. It's just about the fire and the sweets and the sparkly things in the darkness and the feeling that winter is well and truly on the way. The beard story will have to wait for another few months.
In the meantime, I'll be back on Sunday. Hopefully see you then.